Good morning, this is the 10 point for Monday, August 17, 2026. I'm your host, and welcome to your daily briefing from the Wall Street Journal, a guided tour of the reporting and analysis you can't get anywhere else. Today's edition was curated by Morgan Smith and Gary Mitchell under editor-in-chief Emma Tucker, and we have a full slate, from a widening shadow war in the Middle East and a $3 trillion blind spot in big tech's AI spending, to a whopper revival that's shaking up the fast food wars, a Manhattan construction crisis, and a CEO who's secretly testing Wall Street's vocabulary. Let's begin. We start where the newsletter begins, with the desk of Emma Tucker. As Washington pursues a diplomatic exit from the 5-month-old Iran war, Tehran is quietly preparing for a far larger, costlier fight. Our Middle East correspondents Benoit Faucon and Summer said detail how Iran's hardline leaders are rebuilding missile infrastructure and mobilizing forces to widen the conflict against the US and its allies. The diplomatic track took shape in June, when President Trump signed a memorandum of understanding with Iran. Administration officials fanned out to build support for an agreement they hoped would reopen the Strait of Hormuz and start winding down the war. But according to Iranian and Arab officials, the regime's hardliners came up with a different plan. In their view, the pact was likely just an attempt by the US and Israel to take pressure off the global economy and buy time for a bigger attack. Instead of putting faith in talks, they took the past 2 months to prepare for a bigger fight. Their goal, to inflict enough pain to ensure the kind of attacks Iran has endured aren't repeated. This is a critical inflection point: diplomacy on one track, escalation on another, and the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most important oil choke point, caught in between. And while the Middle East simmers, another kind of arms race is accelerating, one measured not in missiles but in GPUs and data center leases. The artificial intelligence race has a $3 trillion blind spot. A journal review of disclosures by 9 major tech companies, including Google parent Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Oracle, and others, found massive spending commitments for data center leases and chips that aren't accounted for on their balance sheets. Each quarter, these companies disclose massive capital expenditures on AI infrastructure. But those figures don't come close to expressing the full extent of future spending to which they've committed. The off-balance sheet obligations, long-term lease contracts, purchase agreements for next-generation silicon, build-out commitments for campuses that haven't broken ground yet add up to a figure that dwarfs the reported capex. Investors are getting a partial picture. The true scale of the AI build-out is hiding in the footnotes, and it's reshaping the economics of the cloud, the semiconductor supply chain, and the energy grid. We'll be tracking this story closely as earnings season unfolds. Speaking of markets, let's take a quick pulse check. As of 6:10 this morning, S&P 500 futures are at 7,815, up 0.13%. DJIA futures are at 53,724, down 0.15%. Nasdaq 100 futures are at 30,281.50, up 0.46%. You can follow our live financial coverage all day at WSJ.com. Now to the headlines. Federal prosecutors and the SEC are investigating whether Los Angeles Dodgers owner Mark Walter or his companies committed fraud by concealing financial connections while borrowing billions of dollars from insurers he controls. The probe centers on whether Walter's web of controlled insurance entities was used to fund acquisitions and operations without proper disclosure, a structure that, if proven, would raise serious questions about corporate governance and regulatory oversight in both sports ownership and the insurance sector. On the diplomatic front, President Trump said he would substantially reduce joint military exercises with South Korea, touting his very good relationship with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. The move signals a potential shift in the U.S. security posture on the peninsula, where exercises have long been a pillar of deterrence. Critics argue it hands Pyongyang a concession without tangible denuclearization steps. Supporters say it reduces tension and creates space for dialogue. Either way, Seoul and Tokyo are watching closely. Rural economic pain is testing the GOP's grip on Iowa, a Trump stronghold. Falling commodity prices, rising input costs, and a generational exodus from small towns are creating political vulnerabilities that Democrats haven't seen in years. The question is whether the party can translate economic anxiety into electoral gains in a state that's trended sharply red. No other state has more Haitians with temporary protected status than Florida. Now the Trump administration has revoked that status, triggering a labor crunch across agriculture, construction, healthcare, and hospitality. Employers are scrambling. Workers face deportation. And the ripple effects are hitting a state economy already strained by insurance crises and housing affordability. America's housing affordability crisis is leading more home buyers and flippers to give abandoned and dilapidated homes in Baltimore a fresh look. Block by block, neighborhoods once written off are seeing speculative investment, but also displacement fears, code enforcement challenges, and the question of whether revitalization can happen without erasing the communities that held on through the vacancy. And there's a hidden advantage to being a job hopper. In a labor market that's cooled but remains tight, workers who switch roles strategically are seeing faster wage growth, broader skill acquisition, and more leverage than those who stay put. The old stigma is fading if you know how to tell the story. Now, a deeper look at that Iran story. The Memorandum of Understanding signed in June was supposed to be a de-escalation mechanism. Administration officials fanned out across the region and in European capitals to build support, framing it as a pathway to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and wind down a conflict that had already disrupted global energy flows and drawn in proxy forces across Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. But inside Tehran, a hardline faction centered around the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the office of the Supreme Leader viewed the MOU as a trap. According to the reporting by Falcon and said, drawing on Iranian and Arab officials, they believed the agreement was an American-Israeli ploy to relieve economic pressure on the global economy and buy time for a larger military operation against Iranian nuclear and missile infrastructure. So they doubled down. Over the past 2 months, they've accelerated the reconstruction of missile production facilities damaged in earlier strikes, dispersed launchers into hardened sites, and mobilized proxy networks for a broader asymmetric campaign. The calculus is deterrence through demonstrated capacity to inflict unacceptable pain not just on Israel, but on U.S. bases and shipping in the Gulf. This isn't a return to the status quo ante. It's a new, more dangerous phase. Let's pivot from geopolitics to the grill. Burger King has overtaken Wendy's. After struggling for years, the chain is gaining momentum in a rocky patch for the fast food industry, growing its restaurant sales and drawing diners at a swifter rate than both McDonald's and Wendy's. The catalyst? A Whopper overhaul overseen by Burger King's U.S. head chef Amy Alarcon, the same chef who developed the Popeyes chicken sandwich that became a viral sensation in 2019. To revamp its signature burger, Burger King added a more premium bun, new mayonnaise, a box to preserve freshness, and, crucially, a corporate chef who had already worked magic at a chicken chain. The result is a product that feels elevated without leaving the value tier. In a sector battling inflation-weary consumers, labor shortages, and shifting preferences, Burger King's comeback is a case study in how product innovation, executed with discipline, can move the needle. Heather Hannon reports. Now, a story that's reshaping skylines and cracking foundations. A near-partial collapse last month at America's largest office-to-residential conversion project in Midtown Manhattan is bringing new scrutiny to this booming development strategy. 19 Manhattan office buildings have begun conversions so far this year, and another 17 are planned, according to Cushman & Wakefield. Cities throughout the U.S. are embracing conversions as a solution to two vexing problems: a severe shortage of housing and a glut of office space left behind by the remote work era. But the Midtown incident, a structural failure during excavation at a 1920s-era tower being gutted for apartments, has engineers, insurers, and regulators asking hard questions about the feasibility of converting deep floor plate, pre-war office towers not designed for residential loads, plumbing stacks, or egress requirements. The stakes are high: billions in investment, thousands of housing units, and a policy bet that adaptive reuse can solve the urban housing crisis. Max Russ takes us on a flyover map of the projects transforming the Manhattan skyline and the risks beneath the renderings. Today's earnings calendar: Fabrinet, H World Group, and XP report. Keep an eye on Fabrinet for a read on optical component demand tied to AI data center buildouts, a nice tether back to that $3 trillion story. The number today is $12. That's what a pack of Ralph Lauren tennis socks costs, a symbol of how American luxury brands are still growing and, in Ralph Lauren's case, outperforming European rivals like LVMH by offering entry points middle-class shoppers can afford. Carol Ryan writes that the accessible luxury strategy, selling brand identity at a price point that doesn't require a trust fund, is driving revenue resilience even as the high-end softens. A $12 sock isn't just a sock. It's a gateway drug to a lifestyle ecosystem and a reminder that in luxury, volume at the base can matter as much as margin at the top. And finally, Bank of America's CEO is playing a secret word game with Wall Street. Analysts who cover the second-largest U.S. bank need a grasp of complex financial metrics, familiarity with regulatory ratios, and, apparently, a high SAT vocabulary score. When Brian Moynihan discloses quarterly results, his lexicon is riddled with obscure, archaic words, gainsay, concomitant, fantods. It isn't happenstance. According to people familiar with the matter, the 66-year-old CEO is playing a game with analysts, and only a small circle inside Bank of America is in on the joke. The words aren't random, they're chosen, deployed with precision, and tracked. Some analysts have started keeping lists. Others treat it as a rite of passage. It's a bizarre, delightful footnote to the theater of earnings season, a reminder that even in the most quantified corners of finance, personality still finds a way to leak through. Beyond the newsroom, four states go to trial against Meta for $1.4 trillion, claiming it misled on social media's harms to children. And Wall Street Journal by side has a guide to the best no-exam life insurance companies, high coverage amounts, competitive rates, and more. That's your briefing for Monday, August 17th. The 10-point is your guide to the Wall Street Journal's reporting and analysis you can't get anywhere else. Your subscription makes our journalism possible. If you've got a tip, we'd love to hear it. There's a link in the show notes. I'll be back tomorrow with the next edition. Until then, stay informed.